Today's daf is Yevamos daf Tesvav, and we are 16 lines from the top of daf Yud Dalid Amud Beis Ta Shema. Today's daf is being learned as a schus refuah shalema for Avadia ben Miriam Leah, Moshe Abba ben Devora bas Mecha, Shmu ben Tehila, Elazar lipa Shalom ben Fega Rachel, Sarah Nechama bas Rus Malka, Baruch ben Rachel, Yisachar ben Hindel Liba, Malka Miriam bas Esther, and Esther Kreindel bas Devora. Today's daf is also being learned Le'ilu Nishmas Mordechai Moshe ben Zelig, and Le'ilu Nishmas Shlomo ben Yibada L'chaim Tovim Reb Chaim Doiv. So we're in the middle of a sugya, which is really a digression from the very intense sugyas in the beginning of Masechtas Yevamos. It's the sugya of Loises Goidedu, Me'inyan Le'inyan. It's the sugya of whether or not Beis Shammai, who throughout Shas argued with Beis Hillel, did they actually conduct themselves based on their own shitos, or did they understand that even though they saw the world a certain way, but the halacha was like Beis Hillel, and it's for that reason they actually followed Beis Hillel. Now, how did we get into this shaila? It's because the first sugya Masechtas Yevamos deals with the halacha that an erva that falls liyibum is patim and a chalitza min hayibum. A tzaras erva that falls liyibum is patim and a chalitza min hayibum. A tzaras erva at soifa olam that falls liyibum is patim and a chalitza min hayibum. And the Mishnah said that this halacha, that a tzaras erva is not a yevama, and she's patim and a chalitza min hayibum, was the sheet of Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai, however, argued, and Beis Shammai was mater tzaras erva l'shok. And then the Mishnah digressed a little bit. The Mishnah said that even though Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel had a difference of opinion as it relates to the law of a tzaras erva, according to Beis Shammai, if the yavam would be miyabim the tzaras erva, he's mekayim a mitzvahs esedei rais of yavam yavam. According to Beis Hillel, if the yavam would be miyabim the tzaras erva, he'd be boil chayve krisos eshasach shaloi b'makom mitzvah. According to Beis Shammai, the tzaras erva, if she would marry someone other than the yavam without there ever being chalitza, she would violate the loisase in the Torah of loisia eshes amesachutza lishzar. According to Beis Hillel, the tzaras erva is not a yevama. As a result, there is no loisase of loisia eshes amesachutza lishzar, which means that the status of the tzaras erva is very different according to Beis Shammai that is according to Beis Hillel, which can create issues from a shidduchim perspective if someone from Beis Shammai was going to marry into Beis Hillel, or if someone from Beis Hillel was going to marry into Beis Shammai. So the Mishnah says that sol gedayte chamina ich wollt gewollt meinen that maybe because of this situation and others, as we're about to see, maybe the people that followed Beis Shammai would have refrained from marrying into a family of Beis Hillel, and the people that followed Beis Hillel would have refrained from marrying into the family of Beis Shammai. Says the Mishnah that was not the case. Rather, lo nimnu Beis Shammai mi lisa nashem mi Beis Hillel, v'lo Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai. Said the Gemara, it certainly sounds like from the Mishnah that even though Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel had difference of opinions, but at the end of the day, Beis Shammai did not follow Shitas Beis Shammai. And that would explain why the Mishnah said that Lo Nimnu, why that they didn't refrain from marrying with each other, because although if they would have followed their Shita, it could have resulted in problems, but at the end of the day, they didn't follow their Shita. As for that reason, it wasn't an issue. Stating that, the Gemara said that really was a big machloikis amayra. Machloikis Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, machloikis between Rav and Shmuel. Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel both said, Asu va'asu. Then not only did Beis Shammai argue in so many different areas of halacha, but asu va'asu, they filed their own opinions as well. If that's the case, how could the Mishnah say lo nimnu Beis Shammai mi lisa nashem mi Beis Hillel v'lo Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai? So the Gemara said it's because before they would marry into the other respective school, they would be informed of the yichus of this particular shidduch that's being read, and they would know, is she the enokol of a tzaras erva? Is she the enokol of a yevama l'shok? And like this, they knew exactly what was going on, and once they knew what was going on, like this, they had nothing to worry about. But the bottom line is, a major machlokes amayram, whether the Talmidim of Shammai, who had their own worldview in so many different areas of halacha, did they actually follow their worldview, or because of the fact that the halacha at the end of the day is like Beis Hillel, they themselves acknowledge the fact that the halacha was like Beis Hillel, and they follow Beis Hillel. There's just one thing that's worth mentioning before we start the daf. And again, we said yesterday during the course course of the daf that there were several related raid bites on this whole topic of Bisham Bisil. Today, Be'ez Hashem, again, there'll be several related raid bites to the topic of Bisham and Bisil, and all these raid bites give a little bit of a time to just the backdrop and the background of what the Machlokes Bisham and Bisil was, and I believe adds a lot of richness just to understanding these dafin in Yevamos, Yudalid and Tezvav, and we'll see again tomorrow, Tezayin. These dafin are literally exhibit A in terms of understanding Bisham and Bisil, but there's just one line in Mesilas Yesharim that we mentioned a few times in some of those raid bites that's worth mentioning, and that's in the end of Perek Chav. The name of the Perek is called Mishkal HaChasidus, and the Mesilas Yesharim, the Ramchal says, quote, V'zeh she'inyin machlokes Beishamai and Beisilo haya inyin kavid liYisrael. The machlokes between Beishamai and Beisilo was an inyin kavid liYisrael. It was very schwer for Klal Yisrael. Because of the great machlokes that existed between the two camps. V'soif nigmar, and at the end it was finally resolved that the halacha is always going to be like Beisilo. And how is it nigmar? Al Yedei Baskel. Hine says the Ramchal, Kiyuma shel Torah. In order for the Torah to have a kiyum, it's important shegmar din ze yishar bechol toikef, that this gmar din should be this way, lo ad ulo omei olamin v'lo yechlash b'shum ponim, and it should never be weakened and diluted in any way. Shloi teyase Torah chas v'chalilo kishtei Torahs. Because otherwise, if we ever go back to the world of Beishamai and Bisil, the Torah can chalila literally become two Torahs. Just to have a little bit of a feel of how the Ramchal, the machlokes between Beishamai and Bisil, in terms of what went on from a historical perspective, from a halachic perspective, and from a sakonas ruchni perspective, that this was so critical that at the time, before this was all resolved, there was mamash a risk, there was a concern that maybe the Torah would chalila be two Torahs. Either way, despite all the drama, there were Amoyron that were of the opinion that Beishamai never really followed their own shita. It was just more in Koisle Beis Medrash that they were dinging zich, and they were coming out differently. Other Amoyron held not that way. That was very much a topic of yesterday's daf, and that is very much going to be the topic of today's daf. We're going to continue along with the Gemara is going to bring Toshma after Toshma after Toshma. The entire daf is going to be Toshmas regarding this Shaila. Tomorrow's daf is going to begin again with Tashmaz. So again, this is one long hemshech, one long sugya, a diversion from the intense Yevamos sugyas. So on that note, 16 lines from the top of daf Yud Daled Amud Beis, Zok the Heilige Gemara Tashma. We learned to the Brayso Af Alpi Shenechleku Beishamai Bisil Bitzaros. Even though Beishamai Bisil argued with regards to tzaras, right? What's the machlokes regarding tzaras? Tzaras erva. Is she noifeles liyibum? She does Beishamai, or she's patim and a chalitza and a yibum? She does Beisil. Uba achayos. Additionally, you find there was machlokes between Beishamai and Bisil in another area that would impact Dine Ishus and Dine Shadochim, and that's regarding sisters. So this is also a sugya Masechtas Yevamos, a sugya that we're going to learn about in Perek Arba Achin, and that is a case where there were 4 brothers, 2 of them were married to sisters, and the 2 brothers that were married to sisters both died, left over no children. So that the 2 sisters are now falling liyibum to the 2 brothers. So we know the halach is that the 2 brothers that are alive are not allowed to do yibum. And the reason is because each one of the Yevamis, although she's a Yevama, she's also the sister of the other Yevama, also known as Achois Kukasai. Achois Kukasai is Chayletzes, because really it's nothing midairaisa, abavaloy misiabenes, midrabanan, you can't do yibum, because midrabanan is viewed as an error. This halacha of Achois Kukasai is really machlokes between Beishamai and Bisil. So this was another area in the world of Ishos where Beishamai and Bisil had a major machlokes. Beget Yasham. Another area in Ishos where Beishamai and Bisil argued was regarding Get Yasham. This is a sugya in Masechtas Gittin. The case is where there was a man that wrote a get because he wants to divorce his wife, and after he wrote the get, he was miyached together with his wife. And there's an idea that maybe if he's miyached with his wife after he wrote the get, so somehow that's mevatel the get, and she's not going to be considered migureshes with this get. Ubesofik eshes ish. Another place where you find there was machlokes in Beishamai and Bisil as it relates to Ishus is regarding the Sofik Eishes Ish. So Rashi has 2 pshatim what the Sofik Eishes Ish is. The longer pshat Rashi brings, which is the pshat that Rashi says is Nira, the Lishna Achrina, the second pshat. The case is where there was a Shchivmara. There was a person lying on his deathbed, and he wrote a get to his wife, but he only wants to divorce his wife in the event that he's going to end up dying, for whatever reason. So he says, Hareza Gitech, Mehayoim im Amos. So the halach is that during that time frame, meaning until we figure out whether he's going to live or die from his illness that he's dealing with, she's considered a suffocacious ish, and this impacts in Allah as machayis b'shayim b'sol how you treat this case. Umagaris is ishtay. Another case where there's machayis b'shayim b'sol in an era of ishus was if somebody divorces his wife, v'lama imay b'pundik, and then afterwards they were meyachid together in a pundik. So this is different than the get yashan. The get yashan, the husband did not give the get yet. In this case, he was megaris ishtay. He actually divorced his wife, and afterwards they were together in a pundik, they were in a state of yichud. We assume that probably there was a bia. Not only that, it's yitachin, it was a bia l'shem kedushin, and as a result, we look at them as being married again. But now everybody agrees with that. It was machlokes b'shayim b'sol. Another area that was machlokes in hilchas ishus regarding b'shayim b'sol is how isha niknes b'sholish drachim b'kesef shtarubia. How much money? How much kesef? So what's the halacha? B'kesef u'b'shava kesef b'pruta u'b'shava pruta. According to Beis Hillel, the amount of money that a man would have to give a woman to be mekadosh would be a pruta. Everyone knows that. Isha niknes b'shava pruta. But it's only shitas Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai in the first Mishnah Masechtas Kedushin says it's not a pruta, but rather it's a dinar. What's the point? The point is that there's so many machloikesin between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel that would impact shidduchim, that would impact ishus, that could have mamzer implications. It's just so obvious. Each one of these cases, if you just play it out, it's obvious how you can have tremendous nafkaminas. And still says the Brayso, Lo nimnu Beis Shammai mi lisa noshem mi Beis Hillel v'loi Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they had no problem marrying with each other. To teach us that they loved each other and they were chaverim l'kayim hashanemar ha'emes v'hashalom ehavu, that there was emes, but at the same time shalom, meaning each person had his shita, they had his principles, but at the same time they were willing to look away a little bit mipnei hashalom. Bottom line is, the Brisa says that even though there were so many different areas in halacha where Bisham Yisrael argued in the world of ishus, but still at the same time they used to continue married. Which, by the way, just to stop for 1 second, this Brisa is just an elaborated version of what the Mishnah said. The Mishnah said it regarding tsaras erva, that's the sugya of the day. The Brisa is not in Yevamos per se, so it's just focusing a little bit more on different areas in halacha where you can see there would be major ishus nafkaminas between Bishai and Bishai. But the maskana is the same maskana. What did the Mishnah say? Lo nimnu. They used to marry each other. And that's exactly what the Brisa says. Stating that, the Brisa continues. And the Brisa says, Rav Shimon says, Nimnu hein min havad, nimnu min asafik. They were nimna if there was ever a vaday problem, meaning if they knew for sure there was going to be a problem, then they would not get married. If there was a suffix, it would be a problem, then they would get married. So the Gemara's Tashma is going to be from Reb Shimon. So the Gemara, if Beis Shammai followed Beis Shammai, and they didn't acquiesce to the fact that the halach was like Beis Hillel Mishal Machi Nimnu, then I understand Shitas Reb Shimon. I understand why, according to Reb Shimon, they were nimna. The reason they were nimna was they're getting into problems. But if you're going to tell me lo yasu, am I nimnu? So why were they nimna? What's the problem? They anyways didn't follow their own shita. So what's pshat and shitas Reb Shimon? Reb Shimon says they were nimna. Why were they nimna? Now, just to be clear, in yesterday's daf, the Gemara brought a raya from the Shitas HaChachamim. Now, we didn't know this Brisa yesterday. We knew the Mishnah, but like we just said, the Mishnah and the Brisa's first Shita is really the same Shita. We know the Shita that they were loy nimna. And the Gemara thought, oh, that's a raya. If they were loy nimna, they were probably loy asu. Gemara says it's not a raya. Maybe lo'olam they were asu. Why were they loy nimna? Because they were moidiyah them. Now we're bringing a raya from the other Shita, the Shita Reb Shimon. This seems to be a checkmate raya. Because Reb Shimon says they were nimna. Why were they nimna? You can explain why they would be loy nimna even if you hold asu. Because you could tell me that they gave them a yichus brief. So like this, they knew it wasn't a problem. But if they were loy asu, why would they have been nimna? So that's the hoysaf in this tashma versus the previous tashma. And this would seem to be checkmate. At the end of the day, Reb Shimon holds they were nimna. So l'chura, it's muchrach that they were also. So from Shitas Reb Shimon, l'chura, you have a raya that they were nimna. But the Gemara says, 1 second, before we bring any rayas v'tizbara, let's see if we can understand this a little bit better. Nei, namid asu, even if you'll tell me that they were asu. Meaning, that's why Reb Shimon holds they were nimna. Bishlam Beis Hillel nimna Beis Shammai. I understand why Beis Hillel was nimna from Beis Shammai, the chavi krisis ninu. Because at the end of the day, in the case of tsaras erva, we'll hold that for a second, but in the case of tsaras erva, it's Beis Hillel has to be worried about Beis Shammai. Why? Because Beis Shammai is matet tzaras erva to the Yavam, according to Beis Hillel, she's an Ish Sach Shaloi B'Makom Mitzvah. As a result, the Yavam, whose boil the Tzaras Erva, is being over in Chayvei Krisos, and any children that are born are going to be Mamzerim Heim LeBeisil. They can be Mamzerim according to Beisil. El Beis Shammai might Nimnu Beisil. But why would Beis Shammai have had a problem according to Beisil? Meaning, the Gemara says, before we get excited, and before we bring any rise for Rav Shimon, let's see if we can understand Rav Shimon a little bit better. Because there's an obvious question, Zok the Gemara, that jumps off the page in Shitas Rav Shimon. I understand why Beis Hillel would have had problems from Beis Shammai. But why would Beis Shammai have problems from Beis Hillel? At the end of the day, what are you worried about? You're worried that the Tzaras Erva did what? Oh, Beis Hillel said she doesn't need Chalitza. Beis Hillel says she's Muteres L'Shok. Okay, she'll be over in Beis Shammai's world, the love of Leisei Eshes HaMeis Achutza L'Rzah. And what are you worried about? You're worried that maybe you can end up marrying her child, her einigal, Bnei Chai V'Lavaninu, V'Ksheirinu, they're kosher anyways. Bnei Chai V'Krisas HaMamzerim, but Bnei Chai V'Lavan HaKsherim, and for the Gemara, no. The reason Rav Shimon had a problem was because Rav Nachman Yitzchak, it's like Rav Nachman Yitzchak said, we'll see it later in the daf, Le'nitzcha El L'Tzara Atzma, Hachanami Le'nitzcha El L'Tzara Atzma. Nachman Yitzchak, to answer a similar question, answered, quote, the concern is not that the person's going to marry the einigal of the tzara. The concern is the person's going to actually marry the tzara. So to over here, the concern was that the person's going to actually marry the tzara. Before we go weiter, just to speak out an obvious question, which is Tosfos Kasha, and that is, so the Gemara mentioned Shitas Rav Shimon. What was Shitas Rav Shimon? Rav Shimon says, not like the Mishnah and Daf Yud Gimel, not like the Tana Kam and the Brayos said that Loi Nimnu B'Sham B'Sol, but rather Rav Shimon said Nimnu. And the Gemara asked, I don't really understand Shitas Rav Shimon. Pashup Shana Rav Shimon. I understand why Beis Hillel would have been Nimna from Beis Shammai, but why would Beis Shammai have been Nimna from Beis Hillel? Beis Hillel's Nimna from Beis Shammai because he may bump into a mamzer, but Beis Shammai has no problem. But Beis Shammai's problem with Beis Hillel, Bnei Chavi Lamaninu, that Ksherim, and the Gemara had to be matchik, that you're worried that maybe you're going to get married to a woman, you're going to find out later she was a Tzaras Erva. I mean, that's really lo shchicha. Maybe the einigal of a Tzaras Erva several generations later, again, it's a larger pool of people, but you marry the actual Tzaras Erva, you can see why the Gemara and the Havamina didn't like it, but the Gemara said that's the maskan. I'm afraid Tosfos, I don't understand. The Brisa didn't just mention one machloikis between Bishai and Bissol. The Brisa didn't only mention that Bishai and Bissol were nechleku and Tzaras Erva. The Brisa mentioned a whole list of machloikis in. Achoyos, get Yashon, Sofik Eshes Ish, Megarish Es Ishtoi Velon Ima Bepundik, Bekesef B'Shava Kesef Pruta B'Shava Pruta. It also mentioned Tzaras Erva. So Enechanami, in the Tzaras Erva Machlokes B'Shai and Bissol, there Beis Hillel needs to worry more about Beis Shammai than Beis Shammai has to worry about Beis Hillel. But what about in all those other cases? You have Machlokes in, she is an Eshes Ish, she's not an Eshes Ish. There's real obvious cases where even Beis Shammai would have a problem with Beis Hillel. So what's the Gemara? Reb Shimon says that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they were both worried about Vadai. Fake the Gemara, Vadai Tzaras Erva is not even an issue. Zok the Gemara, I'm afraid Tosfos, what do you mean? And Chanami Vadai Tzaras Erva is not a problem. But what about some of the other cases? Then you would have a problem. So Tosfos says that it's mashma from the Brisa that the ikr of Reb Shimon was because of Tzaras Erva. That although it's true he's referring to and addressing everything else, but the ikr was Tzaras Erva. And if the ikr was Tzaras Erva, then it's mashma that Beis Hillel refrained from marrying into Beis Shammai according to Reb Shimon because of Tzaras Erva, and Beis Shammai refrained from marrying to Beis Hillel because of Tzaras Erva, and thus fake the Gemara. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, I understand. But why Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? And the Gemara answers it's because of the Chayvi Lavan. You're right. According to Beis Hillel, you're worried about Mamzeris, and Beis Shammai, you're worried about being over the lav in the Torah of Leisiya Eshes HaMeis Achutza L'Irzar. But again, let's refocus. And that is, Dr. Gemara, that you see from Reb Shimon, that Reb Shimon says that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel would not marry into each other. If that's the case, l'chayra, we have a festa raya from Reb Shimon that asu v'asu, that Beis Shammai must have followed their shita, because Beis Shammai didn't follow their shita. Why would they have had a problem marrying in together with Beis Hillel, and why would Beis Hillel have had a problem with Beis Shammai? And that really is the Gemara's hachra in this Tashma that also was. But the Gemara goes weiter, and the Gemara just says that we just mentioned Reb Shimon Shita. Let's see if we can understand Reb Shimon Shita a little bit better. What did Reb Shimon say? They were nimnu from Vadai, but they weren't nimnu from Safik. I mean, if they knew there was a problem, that's when they were nimnu. But if it was a Safik, it was a problem, then they weren't nimnu. Why were they nimnu from Vadai? Because of the Isser. Safik nam Yisurahu. Safik is also an Isser. It's a Sveikadei Rais Alachumra. So they were only nimna from a vadi. Why weren't they nimna from a suffix? So the Gemara clarifies Reb Shimon. Very important clarification. Lo yitemem min ha-suffix, ela min ha-stam. What Reb Shimon meant was that min ha-stam, they had no problem. If there was a vadi issue, then yeah. But even if there was a suffix issue, then yeah. Meaning if they had reason to believe, even me suffix, that maybe there's a tzaras erva problem over here, they stayed away from the shidduch. They wouldn't pick up the shidduch. When did they? Min hastam. So Reb Shimon's moida, the min hastam they did. And the Gemara says, the reason is the moida lahu parshi. Because the assumption is that if there was a problem, they would have been moida them. And from the fact that nobody was ma'idiyah them, they assumed that must be a sign that it's okay. So the Gemara, my kamash. So essentially, what's Reb Shimon saying? The Hava Bereis? No, you can say that there was a ha'emes v'shalom ehav. Well, they really wanted to marry with each other, so they used to be ma'idiyah each other. And really, min hastam, we assumed everything was fine. The only time it wasn't fine is if they knew for sure there was a problem. So that's mamash the chachamim shita. So what is Reb Shimon saying differently? Right till now, we thought that according to the chachamim, they were ma'idiyah. Reb Shimon said, no, even if you're ma'idiyah, it's still going to be an issue. But now we're saying it's not that case. It's not that way. The only time Reb Shimon had a problem is if he knew for sure there was a problem. What, the Chum argue with that? Chum hold if they knew there was a problem, it's still mutter? Of course it wouldn't have been okay. What's the Chachamim saying? The Chachamim is saying is that Ha'emes v'ashalom, and we trust that everything's going to be okay. No, isn't that Reb Shimon? The Gemara says, yeah, enochanami. How come the kula Reb Shimon? Yeah, it's not two shitas. Even though when you read the Brisa, it sounds a little bit like it's two shitas. Like it's really one sheet. It's all shitas Reb Shimon. There really is no machlokes in the Brisa. But the bottom line again, Asher nogeil in yonenu is it certainly sounds like from the Brisa that asu v'asu. And that's what we're saying. If they knew for sure there was a problem, even if there was a suffix problem, they would have stayed away from the shidduch. Min hastam, we trusted them, we assumed that everything was okay. That would certainly apply that at the end of the day, Beishamai followed Beishamai. Because if Beishamai never followed Beishamai, why are we having this conversation? Why are we talking about it? If it was Vadai and it was suffix, as opposed to Stam? There is no other side. Beishamai didn't follow Beishamai. So, why even discuss this? From the discussion of the Gemara, it's mashma that really it was asu v'asu, stating that the Gemara is going to go weiter and it's going to continue with a whole bunch of tashmas. Tashma, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, and we saw Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's shita in yesterday's daf as well. Hey chalachzu ravachas b'Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri was very bothered by this machlokes between Beishan and Beisil. He said, I don't understand. You have a tzaras erva. According to Beisil, she's muteres l'shuk. Also to the Yavam. According to Beis Shammai, she's also l'shuk, she's mutal Yavam. The stakes are too high to just allow Beis Shammai to do one way and Beis Hillel to do another way. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri decided he's going to make a peace treaty. He's going to come and he's going to resolve this machlokes and tzaras erva between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And this is what he said. He said that I have a problem, right? First, the setup. Nasik devri Beis Shammai, havlad mamzer devri Beis Hillel. If someone follows Beis Shammai, then has a baby in Beis Hillel's world, the child's going to be a mamzer. Eichesach shlei b'malka mitzvah. Nasik devri Beis Hillel. If someone's going to follow Beis Hillel, havlad pogum. This is the first time we saw this devri Beis Shammai. Even in Beis Shammai's world, the child is going to be a pogum. What does that mean? We'll see later in the daf. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, "Here's my yetza bonus akalam letzaris. Let's make a takana for the tzaris. You choltzes flame this yavnis. You do chalitza. Now, if they do chalitza, everything's going to be good. Why? Because if you do chalitza, according to Beis Shammai, you'll satisfy that there's no problem with Yevamos l'shuk. And if you do chalitza, even according to Beis Hillel, you didn't do anything wrong. To do Yibum is a problem, but to do chalitza is not a problem. And as a result, like this, you'll never have an issue of mamzeris through Eishesach Shlei B'Malka Mitzvah, and you'll never have a child that's a pogrom because of Yevamos l'shuk. This was Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's patent. This was his eitzah. L'maisa lo yispiku ligmar es hadavar at shenitrfa asha. He tried doing it, but at the end of the day, like yispiku ligmar, he didn't have a chance at shenitrfa asha. As Hashem, maybe we'll talk about this tomorrow. But the bottom line is, he tried implementing it. He couldn't implement it. The Gemara says Rav Shimon Gamliel heard about this, and he said, Man nasalem letzaris harishaynis. Meaning, when he heard about Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's eitzah, so he didn't like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's eitzah. And the reason is, again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's eitzah got knocked out anyways. He tried putting it in place, and it was nitrfa asha. Something happened in Shamayim that didn't allow this to play out. L'maisa, when Reb Shimon Gamliel heard about this, he didn't like it. He said, because what's going to end up happening with the tzaras harishaynos? Meaning, if you're telling me now that really you shouldn't do yibum, and really you should do chalitza, even according to Beis Shammai, who's matat tzaras erva, so what happens with a yavam in Beis Shammai's world, right, you see where we're going with this tashma, that actually did yibum. And now the child was born, the child was a mamzer. So, what are you going to do with these children? You're going to turn them into mamzerim? So Reb Shimon Gamliel said that, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, I hear what you're trying to do, but you have to see the big picture. And the big picture is, we're going to end up with mamzerim here in the world of Beis Shammai. And that's not a good thing. So the Gemara says like this, also, if the Chevra from Beis Shammai actually followed Beis Shammai, I know to come a Manasseh. So I understand the Manasseh. Reb Shimon Gamliel said, I have a real problem. There's going to be children that are ksherim, that suddenly are going to be deemed to be psulim. Eli Amar lo yasu. But if you're going to tell me that really lo yasu, my Manasseh, so what's the Manasseh? It never happened anyways. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak, and this is where Rav Nachman Yitzchak comes in, that no, what Rav Shimon Gamliel was saying was not Manasseh l'tzaros harishonos. What's going to be with the tzaros ervas aliba de Beis Shammai that had Yibum done? Now suddenly we're going to think that those children are mamzerim because Rabbi Yechim Nuri is takana that really is supposed to do chalitza. That never happened. There was no Beis Shammai. There was never a time where, even in Beis Shammai's world, a Yavam was miyabim a tzara serva. You know what he was worried about? He's worried about fakert. What happens with the tzara serva in Beis Hill's world, which is also Beis Shammai's world, in the Olam HaMaisa, that got married without any chalitza because of the fact she understood she was a tzara serva, and a tzara serva is potem and a chalitza umin hayibum. Now you're going to go ahead, and what are you going to say? That the tzaras erva needs chalitza. This is the takana of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Why? To bavar the shita of Beis Shammai. That's what he was worried about. Why? He said, "Uman nasa hachikamer hanach tzaras the Beis Hillel, the tzaras of Beis Hillel. They got married without any yibam v'chalitza. The Beis Shammai heichin navelahu. You want to now bavar and shitas Beis Shammai. You want to say that maybe she's Yevamos l'shuk. Maybe it's tzaras erva more different. She needs chalitza. What should you do? Lichlitzu. Should you do chalitza right now? Mimasu agavrayu. Interesting. It's going to cause the woman to be ma'us to her husband. Meaning, if she's going to have to go now to this yavam and get a chalitza, it's going to affect her shalom bayis. V'chi tema l'mas. And so you'll say, okay, so zayin. That's not the way the Torah works. The Torah is darkei noyam, the Torah is shalom, and as a result, you can't go ahead and do chalitza. The reason you can't do chalitza is because, again, mikanu lahaba, you can make such a takana. But the problem is you have to look at all these froyin that in the avar got married without chalitza, and what's going to be with them? And you're going to tell them to take chalitza? We're so sensitive, and this is going to be literally the antithesis of that. And to say that, she doesn't need chalitza, you can't do that. You can't implement a takana like that. And for that reason, it wasn't done. But Zok the Gemara, we thought that from this shmooze, there was a raya that Beis Shammai actually followed Beis Shammai, but the Gemara says really there is no raya. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri was bavarning the sheet of Beis Shammai, but he wasn't actually bavarning the actual lamaisa of Beis Shammai, and the reason is because even Beis Shammai never followed Beis Shammai. Third Toshma of the day, Toshma, the Amr Reb Tarfon, a classic. Reb Tarfon said, it's 3 lines, but it's classic. To'avni, I have a taiva. Masai tovai tzaras habas liyodi ve'esayin. To be Mekayim, the mitzvah of Yibum with a tzaras habas. Reb Tarfon wanted to be miyabim a tzaras habas. Rashi says right away, we know this Rashi, Reb Tarfon, the erste kleine shira, mitalmidei Beis Shammai haya. Reb Tarfon was a Talmud of Beis Shammai, and because Reb Tarfon was a Talmud of Beis Shammai, he wanted to follow shittas Beis Shammai, but he wanted to make a point that the halacha is like Beis Shammai. He said, "Masai tavei tzaras habas liyadai ve'esayna." But what do you see from here? You see from Reb Tarfon that Beis Shammai actually followed Beis Shammai. So the Gemara, "Ema v'asiyana." No, just the opposite. La'olam Beis Shammai didn't follow Beis Shammai. And what did Reb Tarfon mean when he said, "Masai tavei tzaras habas liyadi ve'esayna"? He didn't mean to be mekayim the mitzvah of tzaras. Just the opposite. V'asiyana, I'm going to allow her to get married l'shuk. I want to dafka go and be mafkir from. It doesn't sound like it. Right? What does ta'avni sound like? Ta'avni sounds like he wants to do something that's unconventional, something that's non-traditional, something that's controversial. He wants to make a point that the halacha is like Beis Shammai. So Ta'avni doesn't sound like he says, I want to do Beis Hillel. Everyone does Beis Hillel. Shkan kunst to do Beis Hillel. You want to go ahead and you want to show not that way. So the Gemara says, Lafukim Dereichem Anuri. No, the reason he used this lashon of Ta'avni, because there was a little bit of a chiddush, because there was Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri that said that even according to Beis Hillel, she has to get chalitza before she gets married. L'shuk, and that was his Ta'avni. He wanted that she should be able to get married without actually needing a chalitza. Now, what comes to mind after we learn this Gemara, before we go weiter? The Havamin of the Gemara, that Reb Tarfon wanted to be Matat Tzaras Abbas, certainly sounds like this is Reb Tarfon L'Shitasa in the first parak of Masechtas Brachas with regards to Kriya Shema. And by the way, isn't that Mishnah the biggest raya in the world that Beis Shammai used to follow Beis Shammai? It's one of the first Mishnayos in Shishas Idbei Mishnah. It's right in the beginning of Shas. Reb Tarfon was Machmer Kedivri Beishamai. It's Tosfos Kasha in the beginning of the Sugi on the top of Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. And again, Be'ez Hashem, hopefully we'll get to this tomorrow. But for now, we have some more festive Toshmas. Zocht Gemara Toshma. This is a Yevamos Toshma. Ma'aseh, there was a story of Bita Rabbi Gamliel, with the daughter of Rabbi Gamliel, Shahois Nesuya LaAbba Achiv. She was married to Abba, who was Rabbi Gamliel's brother. Umeis B'loi Banim. And then Abba died, and left over no children. V'yibeim Rabbi Gamliel es Sarasa. And Rabbi Gamliel was miyabeim the Tzaras Abbas. So, the cases of Tzaras Erva that we've been talking about until now were Reuven and Shimon. Reuven is married to two wives. One is Shimon's Erva, and there's another wife. Shimon's Erva is the Erva. The other wife is the Tzaras Erva. Reuven dies, leaves over no children. The Erva and the Tzaras Erva fully yibum. Al Zen Nemar, the first mission, the first sugya, Masechtas Yevamos. This brisa puts names to the faces. This brisa actually names Reuven and Shimon. Reuven was Abba, who was Rabbi Gamliel, the Nasi's brother. Shimon was Rabbi Gamliel. Abba was married to Rabbi Gamliel's daughter, and he also had another wife. Abba died, so that Rabbi Gamliel's daughter and the Tzara both fell in Yibum. The Brisa says, "V'yibim Rabbi Gamliel es Sarasa." The Rabbi Gamliel actually did Yibum on the Tzara. So what do you see? Rabbi Gamliel was mater for himself Tzara Serva. Clearly he held like Beishamai, but that's not the punchline of the sugya. Punchline of the sugya is that Beis Shammai held like Beis Shammai, and the Beis Shammai actually followed Beis Shammai. Says Dr. Gemara, you have a real life story with great Rabbi Gamliel, l'chura, in accordance with the opinion of Beis Shammai, is being mated Tzaras Erva. Says Dr. Gemara, this is the biggest ride that Asu v'Asur, but the Gemara says it can't be because v'tizbera. Let me ask you the obvious question: Rabbi Gamliel mitamid Beis Shammai, bitmiya, right? What's Rabbi Gamliel mitamid Beis Shammai? Rashi, v'aloy mi bnei banav shel Hillel. He was a descendant of Hillel. So how can you say Rabbi Gamliel is following the sheet of Beis Shammai? You have to say that even though really this tzara should have been a tzaras erva, but she wasn't a tzaras erva. The reason is because Rabbi Gamliel's daughter was different. How so? The islandess Havai. She was an islandess. So what? So it comes out that the tzaras erva was a tzaras islandess, and Rabbi Gamliel held like Rava sheet on the top of Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, Hilchas Tzaras Islandess Muteres, Vafilu Tzaras Bitay Islandess, and it's for that reason it was mutter for him to marry the Tzara. It's because she had a din of a Tzaras Bitay Islandess, and like this sheet, not like Rav Asi who holds Tzaras Islandess Asura, but like the sheet of Rava that even Tzaras Bitay Islandess is Muteres, and that's why it was mutter. But the Gemara says it can't be because Hamidik Tani Seifa, this is Seifa, this is Brisa. The Seifa says Achirim Oimrim. Others say, also known as Rameir B'Shem Acher, but Achirim Oimrim B'Tash Rabbi Gamliel Islandess. So that you want to know why Rabbi Gamliel married the Tzara? Because Bita Rabbi Gamliel was an islandess. What do you see from here? Michal Tanakama Sover, Lav islandess also. Tanakama holds she wasn't an islandess because if Tanakama says that the only reason Rabbi Gamliel was able to marry the Tzara is because she was a Tzara's Bita islandess. So what's the machloik between Acherim and the Tanakama? So the Gemara says no. La'olam, the Tanakama held that the reason Rabbi Gamliel was able to be miyab in the Tzara was because she was a Tzara's Bita islandess. And Acherim holds the reason she was allowed to marry the Tzara was because she was a Tzara's Bita islandess. So what's the machloik? It's hikirba v'loy hikirba ikirbeinayo. Nafkamina is why Tzara's Bita islandess was mutter. The Tanakama held that Tzara's Bita islandess is mutter mi'ikar adin, like Rava Shita on Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, and that's why Rabbi Gamliel was able to miyabim the Tzara. Acherim hold that Tzara's Bita islandess is really also like Rav Asi, that really just because she's a Tzara's Bita islandess, that wouldn't be a reason for her to be mutter. Why then was she mutter? Because what happened was islandess hoisa. He discovered that she was an islandess. An islandess hoisa, if she's nimtza islandess, what happens? It's oiker the kedushin l'mafreya, because we deem it to be a mekach tois. So it comes out he was really never married to the islandess. That's Abba, Rabbi Gamliel's brother, and as a result, the tzara is not a tzara ever. So they both held that the reason Rabbi Gamliel was able to miyabim the tzara is because Rabbi Gamliel's daughter was an islandess. What's the machlokes? The machlokes is why islandess impacted it, and even more in the Metzias. Did he know she was an islandess, or did he not know she was an islandess? Is it because Tzaras Bita islandess is muteres? So even if he knew she was an islandess, still she would have been mutter? Or is it only because he didn't know she was an islandess, so it came out that it was a mekach tois, and that's why she wasn't a Tzaras ever? But either way, la'olam, Rabbi Gamliel held that Tzaras Erva is Aser, V'haraya, Rabbi Gamliel is an Einakol of Hillel Azaken, so there's no way he's going to go Kenega this Psak. What's Pshat on Rabbi Gamliel? That Rabbi Gamliel married the Tzara, L'chayr she was a Tzaras Erva, the Teretz is she was a Tzaras Bita Islands. Iba is saying, but the Gemara says, you can say a different Teretz, that the reason Rabbi Gamliel married the Tzaras Erva, according to the Tanakama, meaning Acherim, we know why. Acherim said clearly that the reason Rabbi Gamliel married the Tzara is because Bita was an islandess. The question is the Tanakama. The first Pshat, even the Tanakama holds she was an islandess. What's the Machlokes? What the gather of the Torah islandess was. But for Iba, you could say a whole different Pshat in Tanakama, and that is Kines Ulubesoif Giresh Ikebenaya. What happened was, Abba was married to Rabbi Gamliel's daughter. However, before Abba died, he divorced Rabbi Gamliel's daughter. And Rabbi Gamliel held that even though Abba was married to his daughter and to a tzara at the same time, she didn't have a din of a tzara as erva, because at the time that Reuven died, or at the time that Abba died, he wasn't married to her anymore. And for that reason, she didn't have a din of a tzara as erva. The Acherim held that in of itself would not have been enough of a reason for Rabbi Gamliel to have been able to marry the tzara, because once they're married together at the same time, that in and of itself would be enough that she should be considered a tzara zara. What's the machlokes? Whether you say Nesuin Harishonim Apilim, or whether you say Misa Apelis. The Gemara Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. It's a little bit of a chazara here. So, according to Acherim, if the fact that they were married together makes her a tzara zara, how is Rabbi Gamliel allowed to marry the tzara? The teretz is she was an islandess, and because she was an islandess, that's why it was mutter. But the bottom line is that Avadu Rabbi Gamliel held that Yinali be miyabim etzara serva, as if you say the hill azaken. If that's the case, so why was he allowed to? And don't tell me islandess, because that's acherim shiti, right? And a chanami different terrace. You have to say Abba divorced her, and because Abba divorced her, and Misa Mapela, so they weren't married at the time of the Misa of Abba, so for that reason it wasn't a problem. If Iba, you're saying, but the Gemara says you could say even a third shot, and that is Yesh Tnai Bebia Ikebenayad. Maybe what happened was, when Abba married Rabbi Gamliel's daughter, he made a Tnai in the Kedushin. There was a Tnai. The Kedushin, the Nesuin was done ala Tnai. And then afterwards, they lived together, and then what happened was, the Tnai turned out was not fulfilled. As a result, if someone's Mekadosh Shal Tanai, someone does the Suan al Tanai, l'chayra, it should knock out the Suan. However, it wasn't so pashut in this case. The reason it wasn't so pashut in this case is because there is a shita that holds. Rashi quotes a Gemara Masechtas Ksubas, Perek HaMader, that there is a shita that holds that if someone does the Suan al Tanai and there's a Be'ila, once there's a Be'ila, the whole Tanai is off. And the reason is because ein adam oisa bilas bilas nos, and there's a concern that after the Bila, the Tanai is not going to be in the sky, and it's going to come out that the person was Stamazana. Nobody would do that. Yisrael Kedoshim. So for that reason, there's a shita that holds that's considered Mechila al Tanai. And that's Sakti Gemara. That's what the Machlokes was over here. The Tanakama held Rabbi Gamliel, that the reason Rabbi Gamliel was able to marry the Tzaras Erva is because when Abba married Rabbi Gamliel's daughter, it was done ala Tanai, and the Tanai was knocked out. As a result, there was a Mekach Tois. But the Acherim hold, ain't Tanai moyel b'biyah. That once is a biyah, the Tanai is not a Tanai. So that in of itself was not enough to knock out the Nesuin to Rabbi Gamliel's daughter. If that's the case, the Tzara was a Tzaras Erva. So if that's the case, how was Rabbi Gamliel able to be miyabin her? The teretz is Rabbi Gamliel was able to be miyabin her because of the fact that she was an Eilas. But the bottom line is what was this Tashma? We thought we had a Raya. The Raya that we thought we had was from Rabbi Gamliel. We had a Maitzin Shahaya Kachaya, where Rabbi Gamliel married a Tzaras Abbas. It's fascinating. A real life story. Says Dr. Gemara, isn't this a Raya that Tzaras Erva is Muteris according to Beis Shammai, but not just Muteris, that we know that Beis Shammai used to actually fulfill that Shita. So the Gemara says, Rabbeinu Shalom. How does the Gemara say Rabbeinu Shalom? V'tizbara. How could you tell me that that's Pshan Rabbi Gamliel? Rabbi Gamliel's an Einakol Fil Azakin. There's no way in the world that he's going ahead and he's following Beis Shammai. So what's Pshan Rabbi Gamliel? So they weren't three Pshatim. Either his daughter turned out to be an islandess, or maybe his brother divorced his daughter before he actually died, or maybe there was a Tanai that was in the spot. As a result, it ended up being a Mekach Tois. Zok the Gemara, Moshe from Mesharshi. So Mesharshi asked the Kasha. There was a story of Rabbi Akiva. With the great Rabbi Akiva, Shalikate Esrig, he was Melakate an Esrig from an Esrig field, Be'echad B'Shvat, on Rosh Chodesh Shvat, V'nog by Bezi Surim. And he gave two types of maestros, Echad Divri B'Shamai, one like B'Shamai, Echad Divri B'Sil, and one he did like B'Sil. So what was the case? The case was, it was Rosh Chodesh Shvat. The significance of Rosh Chodesh Shvat is, we know that maestros has a fiscal year. What is the fiscal year? Machlokes B'Shamai B'Sil. According to B'Shamai, it's Rosh Chodesh Shvat. According to B'Sil, it's Tu B'Shvat. It's Chamisha Asa B'Shvat. What does that mean? That means that any peiros that grew or were nislake, depending on what the peiros were, according to Beis Shammai, before Rosh Chodesh Shvat, belonged to the Friyadige year. After Rosh Chodesh Shvat, belonged to the coming year. According to Beis Hillel, the cutoff is not Rosh Chodesh, the cutoff is Chamishas. We're talking about an esrig. An esrig is defined based on when the Lekita was. When were you actually malakit the esrig? Which means that according to Beis Shammai, what year the esrig is going to belong to as it relates to Maisis will depend on was the Lekita before Rosh Chodesh Shvat, after Rosh Chodesh Shvat. According to Beis Hillel, it's going to depend on was the Lekita before Chamisha Asar B'Shvat, or was the Lekita after Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. Maisis Shahaya Kachaya. Rabbi Akiva was malakit and esrig on Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Now this was year 2 going into year 3 in the world of Shemitah, in the world of Chumas and Maasros. What does that mean? That means if it's year 2, you're going to be chayiv in Shuma Gedoyle, you're always chayiv in that. You be chayiv in Maaser Rishon, you're always chayiv in that. You be chayiv in Chumas Maasros, you're always chayiv in that. But you're also going to be chayiv in Maaser Sheni, because the second year of the Shemitah cycle, there's a chayiv Maaser Sheni. Years 1, 2, 4, and 5, you have to give Maaser Sheni. If it's year 3, then you're going to be chayiv in Maaser On. Now what happened was this was Rosh Chodesh Shvat. According to Beis Shammai, Rosh Chodesh Shvat is the following year. It's year 3. You chayiv in Maaser On. According to Beis Hillel, Rosh Chodesh Shvat is the previous year. It's not Chamisha Asar B'Shvaya, which means you chayiv in Maaser Sheni. So what did Rabbi Akiva do? He was noyak beis Yisurim. Echad k'divrei Beis Shammai, he gave Maaser Ani, thinking that it's the 3rd year, it's already Rosh Chodesh like Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel, he gave Maaser Sheni, assuming it's still the 2nd year like Beis Hillel. Shema Mino, what do you see from here? Also, you see clearly that Beis Shammai followed Beis Shammai. Because even Beis Shammai didn't follow Beis Shammai, so what's Rabbi Akiva's suffix? At the end of the day, we know Beis Shammai Shita, but we don't pass him like Beis Shammai. So the Gemara says, no. Well, maybe Beis Shammai didn't do Beis Shammai. So why did Rabbi Akiva give 2 Isurim? Not because he wanted a Bavarn Shitas Beis Shammai. Not because he had a suffix. What? Maybe the halach is like Beis Shammai. Because it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, Beis Shammai didn't even do Beis Shammai. But rather, his suffix was something else. His suffix was Gemara Yistapikle. He had a suffix in his Messiah. He couldn't remember what Shitas Beis Hillel was. He couldn't remember if Beis Hillel held that Rosh Chodesh Shvat is Rosh Hashanah Li'Lanos, and to all the world, in the world of Maasros, or maybe really it's Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. So because of this suffix, therefore he had no choice but to be noik beis Yisurim. But it's not because of Shitas Beis Shammai, it's because he had a suffix what Shitas Beis Hillel was. Another kasha. Ma'aseh, there was a story of the older Kalasi Shel Shammai Hazokin. That Shammai Hazokin, the patriarch of Shitas Beis Shammai's daughter-in-law, had a little baby. And it was Sukkot time. Upiches Esamazeva. And Shammai went and he opened up the roof where this baby was sleeping. V'sikech al gabe mito. And he put schach on top, shvil katan because of the cut. Now the context is Machlek B'Sham Beis Hillel, when the zman of chinuch is, in terms of the mitzvah of sukkah. This is raid that we spoke about in the beginning of Masechtas Chagiga, but the point is, there was a machlokes in Beis Shammai Yisrael. And Beis Shammai's shita was that already a baby is obligated in chinuch. And halacha l'maisa, he went ahead and he actually put tzchach on top of a little baby. So the Gemara says, Shema Mina, what do you see from here? Also, you see clearly that Beis Shammai followed Beis Shammai. So Beis Shammai didn't follow Beis Shammai, so why is Beis Shammai following Beis Shammai? Now, incidentally, this is Shammai Azokin, it's not Beis Shammai. But either way, Snach Gemara, don't you have a right that they followed Shammai? So Gemara says, Hasam Aroya Omer Lafushe Aver Ka'avet. There it wasn't a problem. And the reason it wasn't a problem over there is because it wasn't nicker, it wasn't obvious that Beis Shammai was actually following Beis Shammai. Now it's interesting, this is a little bit of a monkey wrench into the whole sugya. Because we're saying now that even though there was a sensitivity for Beis Shammai to follow Beis Hillel, because at the end of the day the halacha is like Beis Hillel, but now we're saying that there's a stipulation to that. Because in the event that by Beis Shammai following Beis Shammai, it's not going to be nicker that they're following Beis Shammai, then it could be for sure Beis Shammai would have followed Beis Shammai. Which again, is a game changer in terms of understanding what's going on in our sugya. The question is, why? There's a Rashi on Amud Beis, the top Rashi on Amud Beis, Ayin Sham, where Rashi seems to say that the whole reason that Beis Shammai would have gone like Beis Hillel was based on Lois Eskoidado. And Lois Eskoidado was only, it looks like 2 Tyrus, like we spoke about yesterday, and being that over here, it's not muchach that it looks like 2 Tyrus, so no worries about Lois Eskoidado. Just like in 2 Mekaymis there's no Lois Eskoidado, or even 2 Batidinim b'Makam Echad there's no Lois Eskoidado, where it's not muchach that it's agudas, you don't have to worry about it. And that's the whole sugya of whether Beis Shammai followed Beis Shammai or went like Beis Hillel, because it's rooted in the concept of Lois Eskoidado, and being that there's no Lois Eskoidado in this case, therefore it's not going to be a problem. The Ritva says a different pshat in the Gemara, but whatever the pshat is, the words of the Gemara are clear. That being that it wasn't muchach that they were following their own shita, but you can easily say that Shammai Azaken held like Beis Hill, but at the same time, he just wanted to bring a little luft. He wanted to bring some good air, right? The weather's nice, otherwise he's a mitzvah potem and asukah probably anyways. So it's a nice day outside, you want some nice, cool, fresh air. As a result, he's doing it. It's not muchach that he's doing it for Shitas Beis Shammai, and for that reason, it has nothing to do with our Shmu. Zok the Gemara Nacha Maisa. Masim Marzutra asked the Kasha, Maisa, there was a story. This story is mentioned in a Mishnah, in Mesachtes Mikvais, which means it's a Mikvais type of story. So the Maisa was B'shoikis Yehu. It happened with the shoikis of Yehu. So what's a shoikis? So Rashi says a shoikis is an even. It's a very, very large stone. That's chalula. It's hollow inside. Shetachas tzinar. It was underneath a tzinar. That's like a pipe. That was flowing water from a mountain. It was known as shoikis Yehu. Now this shoikis Yehu was attached to a mikvah. The Shoikis Yehu itself didn't have the share of a mikvah. It wasn't big enough for there to be 40 sa of water. But at the same time, it was attached to a mikvah. So there was water from a mikvah through a tube that was attached to this mikvah. Through the concept of hashaka, what we say is that we can look at the two bodies of water as if they're mechuber to each other. Here's the chiddush. So that even the Shoikis Yehu, which in itself didn't really have 40 sa of make shamim for it to be a kosher mikvah, but being that it was attached to a kosher body of water, so that was enough for it to now be kosher. And lamaisa, you know what happened in the Shoikis Yehu? Shoisib Yerushalayim, it was Yerushalayim by Sinakuva mikvah. It was attached to a mikvah. V'chol Taira Shoyib Yerushalayim Nasan Al Gaba. And this was like the most common place that people would be metayr their tires. People would go there, and that's what they would do it. Okay. Now, what's the Maisa? What's the significance? Bishamai heard about this mikvah, Behir Chivua, and they went ahead and they widened the hole that was attaching the Shoikis Yehu to the mikvah. And the reason was, Bishamai held, that the only time you can say hashaka. The only time if you have a body of water that's not really a kosher mikvah, but it's attached to a body of water that is a kosher mikvah. So we look at the smaller body of water as if it's mechuber to one. That's only if the wall that's separating these two bodies of water are paretz meruba ala oymen, or in the lashon of mikvahs, it's tipaches ruba. Most of the wall is knocked down. Then we look at it as one big matziv, and then we say it's going to be kosher. That was the shita Beishamai. And Beishamai had heard that wasn't the metzias, and because it wasn't the metzias, they went and they broke down the wall, they knocked down the barrier, they made it paretz meruba. So like this, it's going to be okay. Now, V'tanan, what's the shita of Beis Hill? Beis Hill's shita is mentioned in Mishnah. Ir of mikvahs. If you want to be ma'ar of mikvahs, and by the way, if this sounds familiar, it's because we just had this in the Tumah v'tahira is in the end of Masechtas Chagiga Chafal from the base. So Beis Hill's shita is that how do you attach to mikvahs? K'shveiferes anoy. As long as there's a hole that's the size of a shveiferes hanoi, that's a tube, but oivya, taking in the thickness of the tube itself, not just the inside part, it's the external circumference, not just the internal, ubechalala, plus the internal as well, which is what kishtei etzbais, it's the thickness of two fingers, chayzois, lemkaima, where you can dray your fingers there. But the bottom line is that what do you see from here? Beis Hill held that in order to attach this, you wouldn't need to have such a big opening that's mechaber these two bodies of water. It's Beis Shammai that holds that you need paretz meruba lo'imid, you need achatifacha is beruba. And Beis Shammai halacha l'maisa said, shoikis yehu, make sure you make it bigger. Mina also. So you see, Beishamai follow Beishamai. So it's the same teretz said in the previous Gemara. Now there it's different. It's being that it wasn't muchach that when Beishamai went ahead and they widened this hole, that they were doing it to be machsher the hashaka, because they could just say they just wanted the water to flow a little more smoothly. It should go a little more swimmingly. It's not muchach that they were doing it to make it into a kosher body of water. So some muchach that we're doing it for Shita D'Shamai is for that reason it's not going to be a problem. So Gemara Toshma Nacharayit. Amar Rabbi Tzaddik said, "K'shayisi lo mitayre itzel Rabbi Yochanan hachayrani." Rabbi Tzaddik said there was a time I was learning the Heilige Torah by Rabbi Yochanan hachayrani. I saw Shayachal Pas Chareva b'Melach. He was mekayim the Mishnah in Ovis. Kipshutai. He was eating Pas b'Melach. That's what he used to eat. He used to eat crusty bread together with salt. B'shnei b'tzayres. It's because it was a hunger year. It was hard to get food. Basi v'idati es abba. So Rabbi Tzaddik said, I came to my father, Rabbi Tzaddik, and I notified him, and I told him what's going on. Amali told me, go bring him olives. Give him something to eat. So I brought him olives. So I brought him a barrel of olives, and inside this barrel, inside this basket, he saw shein lachen, that the zeisim were moist. And the reason they were moist is because they were bunched together very, very closely, and as a result, there was moihal, right? There was like water that was oozing out, liquids from the zeisim, which made it wet. Amali, so Reb Elazar told him, Einani oichel zeisen. Ich esse nicht zeisen. I don't need zeisen. So the Gemara says, Basi v'idati es Abba. So Elazar says, I came home and I told my father, Reb Tzadik. I said, I went and I brought him zeisen. He says, ich esse nicht zeisen. Amali, so he told me, Leich ve'emar loy. Go tell him. Chavis nekuva haisa, that when the zaysim were put inside this chavis, really the chavis, the barrel originally was nekuva, it had a hole on it. But what happened was the shmarim, the sediment was what closed it. Meaning, Reb Tzadik understood, Reb Elazar Tzadik, that he understood that Rabbi Yochanan Achroni ate zaysim. Didn't eat zaysim, he ate zaysim. The reason he said he didn't eat zaysim was because he didn't want to eat these zaysim. And the reason he wanted to eat these zaysim is because he saw they were lach. If they're lach, they're mukhshar lekabel tumah. Food becomes roy lekabel tumah once it's wet, which meant that in the event that it came in contact with an amaretz or any form of tumah or a kuti or an yehudi, they would be tumah. See, he was worried about the kashrus from a tumah v'tayra perspective of these zaysim, and that's why he didn't want to eat it. So Reb Tzadik told Reb Elazar Tzadik, I chap, that's what Rabbi Yochanan Achroni is bothered by. I totally understand. So this is what you should tell him. Tell him that when the zaysim were put into the chavis, it was a chavis nekuva. The fact that it's a chavis nekuva would have caused all the moihal that's coming out of the zaysim to go out of the chavis. If they leave the chavis, that means that the person that put the zaysim in doesn't want the moya. Because if he wants it, why would you put it in a basket that has holes? You'd put it in a basket that would contain the moya. So if you, and it must be you don't want. If you don't want it, then that liquid is not machshir the zaysim l'kabel tumah. So tell him that even though it's lach, it's not machshir l'kabel tumah. Now he's going to say, what do you mean? But it was wet. It was wet. It's all there. It's not nekuva. No, sasmu shmarim. The sediment of the zaysim is a little thick, and it plugged it. But in terms of the das of the balabais, he put it into a chavas nekuva. And if you put it into a chavas nekuva, it doesn't satisfy the requirement of Masachtas Machshir. It's not Mukhshal Kabel Tumah. It's not Mukhshal Kabel Tumah. It's not something you have to worry about. Now, what does Sasmu Shmar have to do? And even tonight we learned in the Mishnah Chavish Shal Zaysim Migul Golim. If someone has a Chavish Shal Zaysim, that's Migul Golim. It's all kvetched together. B'Shamay says Ein Tzrich L'Nakiv. You don't have to be Menakiv it. It doesn't have to have any hole. In order for it not to be mukhshal l'kabel tumah, it does have to have a hole, and if it doesn't have a hole, it's going to be mukhshal l'kabel tumah. Machali b'sham b'sil is whether the moil that comes from zaysin is a liquid that's machshal l'kabel tumah, or whether it's not a liquid that's machshal l'kabel tumah. B'shamu says it's not machshal l'kabel tumah, and therefore even if it has no nekev, it's not a problem, because it wouldn't be machshal l'kabel tumah anyways. Beisil says tzricha l'nakiv, because Beisil holds that the moil that's yotzim in azaysin is machshal l'kabel tumah. Aber umaydim zok the Mishnah shem nikva v'sasmu shmarim shitahira. Everybody agrees that if it was nikva, if there was a hole, v'sasmu shmarim, and then the shmarim plugged it, shni tahira, it's for sure going to be tahira. Meaning, even though at the end of the day, right now, it doesn't have a hole, but even Beisil is going to agree that's going to be tahir. So Zok the Gemara, here's the punchline. Even though Reb Tzadik was a Talmud of Shammai, now, if he was a Talmud of Shammai, then really this whole conversation is a moot point. Because even though the Zaysim were lach, but the moil that's Yotzim as Zaysim, the Shammai sheet, this is not a problem. But the Maisi always follow Beisil. So he was makbet to put it into a Chavas Nekuva, it was a smooth Shmarim, and that's why it wasn't a problem. That's just a postscript to the story. So again, the Maisi was Rabbi Yochanan Achroni, it was B'shnei B'tzayros, he was eating Pasuk B'melech. Rabbi Tzadik is a Talmud, he comes home, he tells his father, he says, Tata, we have to help my Rebbe. My Rebbe's mamash eating bread and salt. He has nothing to eat. So his father said, go bring him zaysim. So he takes zaysim and he puts it into a chavis nekuva. By the time he got there, it was already sasmu shmarim and it was wet. And Yochanan Achroni didn't want to eat it because he held it was mukhshal l'kabel tumah, and as a result, it's going to be a problem. So the Gemara says, so Reb Tzadik came home and he told this to Reb Tzadik. So Reb Tzadik told him, go tell him that it was a chavas nekufa and explain to him that law, which he knows that if it's sasmu shmar, if it's not a problem, it's not going to be a problem. What's the punchline? The punchline is from the postscript of the story. Reb Tzadik was a Talmud of Shammai. If Reb Tzadik was a Talmud of Shammai, really he should not have had to have been makbid and putting it into a chavas nekufa. The reason he was makbid is because kol ma'asav liyasa al k'divrei Beisil. Because he was always makbid to go like Beisil. See, he anyways knew to put it into a chavas nekuva. Punkte was sasmu shmarim, and that's why it wasn't a problem. We just need the last line. It's not the Gemara. Yeah, Rabbi Shlomo asu. Rabbi Shlomo, you're going to tell me ultimately that Beishamai went like Beishamai, Hainu Revusni. So that's the chiddush of Reb Tzadik, that he was a person that called Ma'asav Liyasa al K'divrei Beisil. Eliyam Layasu. But if everyone from Beishamai anyways went like Beisil, because they were Layasu, my Revusni. What's the chiddush? That's the Tashma. This is the raya that it would seem from here that the Talmid of Beishamai did follow Beis Shammai. Zok the Gemara, one final tashma. Shalu Rabbi Yeshua. We're coming full circle. We're coming back to Tzaras Erev. They once asked Rabbi Yeshua, the great Rabbi Yeshua, Bishum ben Chananya, the Baal Plukta of Rabbi Eliezer, the great Talmud Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai. So they asked Rabbi Yeshua, Tzaras Habas ma? What's the halacha regarding the Tzaras Habas? Amalehem, so he told him, Achleis b'Shammai b'Yisrael. And then they said, who's the halacha like? He told them, why are you forcing me to get involved in between two great mountains, between two great camps, between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? And then he said, I'm afraid to opine, because I'm afraid they may come and kill me if I'm going to say what the halach is. But then he said, I will say Eidos. There were two great families in Yerushalayim. Mishpachas Beis Tzevu ben Achmoi, and Mishpachas Beis Koifim ben Mekoshish. Those were the names of the families. Shnehem b'nei Tzaros. They're the children of Tzaros. Umehem Kohanim Gedolim. And from there are Kohanim Gedolim. V'shimshu al Gavim Mizbeach. And they were Mishamish on the Mizbeach. So the Gemara says like this. They asked Rabbi Yeshua, what's the halacha about Tzaros Erva? And he was afraid to get involved. And he even said why he's afraid to get involved. Because he's afraid that if he's going to say the wrong thing, people are going to come after him, because essentially by him saying the wrong thing, he's implicating certain people, saying that they're not ksherim, and there could be a problem. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shlomo Asu. Bishlam, you can tell me that Beis Shammai followed Beis Shammai had to come into Siyarani. I understand why he was afraid. He's afraid that the Olam is going to come running after him, and they're going to tell him that you just passled me. Rashi, Damashvile Mamzerim, Veliktelele. They may actually kill him. He was afraid they're going to push and kill him, Rashi says, for saying that they're Mamzer. Eli Amalei Asu. But if you can say Lo Asu, I might come into Siyarani. So why was he afraid? And the Gemara goes right. Even if it's true that they were Asu, I still have a problem. I have another kasha. Agav. This is parenthetic to the point that we're trying to make. We're just proving from Rabbi Yeshua that the Talmidim of Shammai actually followed Beis Shammai. Because if he would have said the wrong thing regarding Tzaras Erva, there were people that would have been din mamzerim, which means that there would have been problems. And right, just to clarify, what does it mean there were people that would have been din mamzerim? Anyone from Beis Shammai that was the child of a yibum with a Tzaras Erva in Beis Hillel's world would have been considered a mamzer. So by him going and passing the halachas like Beis Hillel, you're creating mamzer, which is something he's afraid to do. Poshit sakonis nefashis. He's afraid. He said, I'm afraid for my life. Meaning, it sounds like maybe he would have, but he wasn't mechuyev to get involved in this situation, which again is also a fascinating discussion. One of the subplots in today's daf. But either way, the Gemara says, but besides, I have another problem with this. Agav, I have another problem. Even if Beis Shammai followed Beis Shammai, why was Rabbi Shua worried? Rabbi Shua has a shita that we also saw in yesterday's daf, that ein mamzer el mechayim misas bezdin. That the only time a child is a mamzer if he's born from a chayim misas bezdin. And a tzaras erva is at worst Eishes Ach Shloi B'Mokem Mitzvah, and Eishes Ach is an erva of a Vosfar Oynish, a Chayve Krisos, right? Some are Rayas, a Chayve Misas Bezdin, some are Chayve Krisos, even within Chayve Misas Bezdin, some are Skilo, some are Chenek, some are Sreifa, right? There's different halachas within the world of Arayas. But the bottom line is that, says the Gemara, so what was Rabbi Yeshua worried about? He wasn't making anyone a mamzer. Rabbi Yeshua was going to say, I didn't say you're a mamzer, I don't hold you're a mamzer, I hold you're a child of an Eishes Ach. Aber at the same time, an ervanat, the Gemara says that's true. The Gemara knew, and Rabbi Yeshua knew that by him saying tzaras erva asura like Beis Hillel is not necessarily implicating anyone as a mamzer, but at the same time, nay nami the mamzer have a pogum yohava. But at the same time, the child would be considered a pogum. And what does it mean? The child would be considered a pogum. The child is an imperfect child, which means at the very least the child would not be able to marry into kahuna. So when you need a greater yichus, that would be a problem. And how? What's the makar to this? Why should the child be a pogum? It's not a mamzer. So where does it become pogum? Mikal v'chomer me almana. Kal v'chomer for almana. Ma almana. Ma dechan almana she'en isura noyeg bakoil. B'na pogum. Ma dechan almana she'en isura noyeg bakoil. Right? An almana that marries a kohen gadol. The child is a chal. It's a pasuk in the Torah. And that isser, almana with kohen gadol, is an isser that's not shava bakol. Only a kohen gadol is not allowed to marry almana. Even a kohen who's not allowed to marry a grusha is allowed to marry almana. So it's an isser that's not shava bakol. Yet, b'na is pogum. Zu, this she'isura shava bakol. This isser, which is an isser that relates to anybody, we're applicable. This isser is going to be negay everybody. Certainly, the child is going to be a pogum, and Rabbi Yeshua didn't want to get involved in this situation because he was worried about creating a pogum. Which, by the way, if that's the case, if he was worried not about mamzer, he's worried about pogum, then it's Lebeis hagisois. It goes both ways. He didn't want to say that halacha is like Beis Hillel, because then if someone came from a yibum with a tzaras erva, that child's going to be a pogrom. He also doesn't want to say that halacha is like Beis Shammai, because then if somebody comes from Yevamos Shuk, where there was a tzaras erva that was multiple yibum by chalitza, that child's also going to be a pogrom. So it's not just in Beis Hillel, Klapi Beis Shammai, it's not just the Einiklach of Beis Shammai that maybe are going to have issues. It's really everybody. Everyone loses in this situation, depending on which way he goes. And it's for that reason this was something that he wanted to stay away from. Abul Maisa, one thing you do see, says the Gemara, you see that the Talmidim of Shammai certainly follow Beis Shammai. Because if they didn't follow Beis Shammai, what was he afraid of? What's the Mesiarani? So it seemed that Lamaisa, at the end of the day, they follow Beis Shammai. Because otherwise, why are we even having this conversation? Zok the Gemara, one postscript to this Shalu, the question that was asked to Rabbi Yeshua. Again, they asked Rabbi Yeshua, Tzaras Abbas Mahu. And what did he tell him? He says, why are you getting me involved in a Greisa Machlokes? This is not something that I want to get involved in. And then at the end, he told them that I will say one thing, made Lochem, I can say Eidos, that there were two Mishpachas Gedolos down in Yerushalayim. He even named the families. These children were Einaklach of a tzaras erva, umehem kohanim gedolim v'shimshul agabim mizbech. So the Gemara says, "Kubo minei tzaras." The question was if the tzaras mutter, v'kapashet le bnei tzaras, and then he started talking about the children of the tzaras. So why did he talk about the children of the tzaras? That was never the question. The question was the tzaras themselves. So the Gemara says very simple. Tarti kaboy minei. They asked him two questions. The first question was tzaras mai. What's the halacha regarding the tzaras? And then they said, "Im tim tzaloy mat tzaras kebeis hillel." If you're going to tell me that halacha of the tzaras like beis hillel, that she's muteres l'shuk. There's no loisei mesachutza lishzar. Even without even mechalitza. So his question was, B'nei tzaris lebeis hillel, the Beis Hillel, the Beis Shammai ma'u. How would the B'nei tzaris of Beis Hillel be viewed in the world of Beis Shammai? Meaning, how would Beis Shammai perceive the B'nei tzaris? So the Gemara asks an interesting question, L'may nafkamina. Why does it matter? Meaning, if you tell me that Allah is like Beis Hillel, why do we care how the B'nei Beis Shammai would have perceived the B'nei tzaras erva of Beis Hillel? If we anyways don't pass like Beis Shammai, why does that matter? So the Gemara says, it matters. The reason it matters is because whatever Beis Shammai would think of the Bnei Tzaras Erva, we can apply into our own world. Lemivshat Vlad Machzeg Rushasai leBeis Hillel. Because with Chapen Afkamina, with a Vlad Machzeg Rushasai, Al Liba de Beis Hillel. Machzeg Rushasai is also a Chayvei Lavin. The question is, if the Vlad of a Tzaras Erva that married L'shuk without Yibam V'chalitza, according to Beis Shammai, is a pogrom, Pasul Kahuna, so that means that Bnei Chai V'Lavan are pogrom. If Bnei Chai V'Lavan are pogrom, so Bnei Machzeg Rushasai, even L'didan, are also going to be pogrom. If, however, the children are going to be kosher according to Beis Shammai, so they'll be kosher, leave it to us as well. In other words, the reason Rabbi Yeshua was going weiter, the reason he's continuing to discuss the Bnei Tzaras, is not because he's concerned about Beis Shammai. It's because he felt that there's an important halacha, leave it to Beis Hillel. What's the halacha? I don't know, Bnei Machzeg Rushasai. Tos asks a very obvious question. Why are you jumping to Machzeg Rushasai? Right? It's Negeya, Bnei Yevamos Shuk. Not which she's a Tzaras Erva, which is not a Tzaras Erva. Right? In this case, the Tzaras Erva, according to Beis Hillel, is not an Nisi Yevamos Shuk. So the child is a kosher. You want to know what's the halacha libid Beis Shammai? L'may nafkamina, according to Beis Hillel? What do you mean? Nafkamina is, if you have a Yevamos Shuk, that's not a Tzaras Erva. This is a regular bona fide Yevamos Shuk. There's a lot in the Torah, like Sniya Eshes HaMeis HaChutz L'Zah. You want to know what the halacha of the children is going to be. The same exact Shiloh. What's the din of Yevamos Shuk that gets married without Yevam V'chalitza? Is the child kosher or apostle? Punkt in Beis Shammai, that case is true by a Tzaras Erva. Punkt in Beis Hillel, that case is not true in a Tzaras Erva. But at the end of the day, everyone agrees there's something called like Seish the Meis HaChutz L'Zar. This is Yevamos 101. It's a puzzle. There's a lot in one of the Taryag mitzvahs. So you want to know what the halacha of the child is. Tois kash, apash the kash. But either way, Zok the Gemara, that was the second thing. And what were the two tzadim? Mi kamin a Kalvachayim. Do we say Kalvachayim? The Kalvachayim mentioned a minute ago. Ma amana l'kan gadol she'eni surah shava b'kol ben apagam. So not the chanamana. That's any surah shava b'kol. And the Torah says clearly that if a kohen gadol has a child from an amana, the child is a pogrom. So zush she'isur shavah bakol. Here with the isur is shavah bakol, ain't a din shepnah pogrom. So certainly the child should be pogrom. By the way, this is reminiscent of what we saw earlier in the Masechta, in the Sugi Vasei Deich Loisasei, where the Gemara used the svara of a Loisasei she'ene shavah bakol as a kula in the world of ene shavah bakol. In fact, it emerged from the Gemara that even though we know Asei is not Deich Loisasei Vasei, but Asei is Deich Loisasei Vasei she'ene shavah bakol. So you see, when a lav is ene shavah bakol, it's a klishus qualitatively in the lav. So the Gemara says, Madach model Kohen Gadol, which is a kula de lav. Why? Because it's Eina Shava Bakal. Still, you see that what? The child is a pogrom. Says, Zu, She'isur Shava Bakal, Machzeg Ushasai, or Isi Yevamos Lashok. These are lavin that are Shava Bakal. In addition to the pogrom, you can ask, Mal Amona She'i Atzma Mischalelas. The halach is if the Kohen Gadol marries an Amona, which he's not allowed to do, he's boiled Amona, she herself becomes a Chalala. She herself is never allowed to marry a Kohen, even though usually an Amona is allowed to marry a Kohen, but this Amona will get it done like a grusha, Rashi says. She won't be able to marry a kohen. She'll never be able to eat truma. He atzma mechalelas, as opposed to a machzeh grushasai. If someone's machzeh grushasai, now she's anyways also to a kohen, because she was a grusha by definition, but it doesn't impact her truma. So you don't have this he atzma mischalelas. So if you don't have the he atzma mischalelas, so based on that, maybe it's not a good kal v'chomer. Meaning, almana, although it's a lav shein neshava b'koil, but he atzma mischalelas. Maybe that's why the child is mischal, as opposed to a grusha amalahu. So Yeshua answered him, and he told him, he said, I'm afraid, as it relates to the first question, I'm not getting involved. And you want to know about the children of Tzaris? I mean, I'm not telling you who the halach is like. I'm not going there. You want to know, what about the children of Tzaris? And if someone, a Tzaris Erva, would get married without Yibam v'chalitza, leave it to Beis Hillel, what would be the din of the children? I could tell you as a fact that in Beis Hillel's world, there's B'nai Tzaris, Animeid, Lochem, where there were many Kehanim Gedolim, no one seemed to have a problem with them, and vice versa. No one, even Beis Shammai, seemed to have gone along with it, so nobody seemed to treat them as being pogrom. So even Beis Shammai would agree that the Bnei Chayvei Lavin would not be considered tchum. So we're ending in the middle of a sugya, and he's daffing along. Baruch Hashem, we have a lot of related raid bites that go mamish to the core of today's daf. We have a related raid bite on Reb Tarfon. Reb Tarfon, who was prominently featured in today's daf as being the Talmud of Beis Shammai. We have a related rabbi on Rabbi Yeshua, this last Gemara that we just learned, where Rabbi Yeshua didn't want to be machriya between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, which was a very interesting approach to the world of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, because everyone else was very much machriya. But Rabbi Yeshua was not machriya. He said, Nisyara and Ishnei Harim Gedolim, between two big machloikisin. It's not something he wanted to get involved in. We have some other related raid bites as well, B'ez Hashem tomorrow, where they can continue on this note with regards to the sugya of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel.